Hi guys, welcome to today's video. In today's video, we'll be continuing our alternate history of the world series. And as we know, World War II has already started, and it's between the communists and the Allies, which are a mix of mostly democracies, but yeah. As the push into North Africa by the Comintern has been more successful, but overall, their campaign isn't as good. Overall, can kick the Raj back. But at this point, Japan sees opportunity in taking lands from China, Taiwan, and all these nations. Well, Taiwan is technically part of China. But their goal really is to kind of set up some naval warfare with a non-aggression pact with the Comintern. Japan is able to move into huge swaths of Chinese territory and even take the island of Taiwan out. And that's significantly helping the communists into China. But pretty much a stalemate over here, but in North Africa, their success is growing. With Dominion-like things in North Africa being demolished. Why is that the case? Because, well, France made a bunch of dominions. They're still fighting. French territory, but under different management. The South American nations that tried last video failed. As you know, Italy did too. After they went into Bulgaria. And so their advance is all over Northern Africa. But the Americans have started sending forces abroad, as they have crushed the North American nations. The North American imperialist nations, including Bolivia, Gran Colombia, and Peru. Without being surprised when Germany makes a surprise attack onto Namibia. Which isn't much of a surprise, but it's in a spot that nobody was ready for. With them managing to actually secure this with the help of Russia. But that's assuming, yeah. And they're assuming they'll have success in here. Japan is doing so well, but that's before the Americans have got there yet. With their coup in their attempt into Philippines not going so well as they're stalemated out, they start moving into Chinese territory. But the Americans send their forces to China at this time, with them moving through Taiwan and in the middle of here, creating naval dominance, making these areas of Japan, the Empire of Japan, too hard to get to by the Empire of Japan. So yeah, their imperialism isn't going so well, but they managed to secure lands up here. But when American forces land in China, in the south, they start moving up north. And Chinese forces from the north come to the south, and American forces together, they kick Japan back. But their real goal is the communists within China. Their goal might be a good job, but really, a big chunk of America is focused on China, and they're getting ready for their landings around in southern Africa to go after, not southern, western, to go after this northern front. With Ethiopia losing a huge swath of territory. But at this point is where the U.S. lands in the south and starts pushing them back. With this being a big deal because a lot of forces are coming from Britain and the USA. And this being a big swath of land being liberated. Showing that it's really only the Soviet Union that's really doing anything, with Germany getting in trouble. As this happens. Their campaign to reestablish everybody as a fleet and go back to Europe. But at this point, the U.S. starts persuading Saudi Arabia to come, which Saudi Arabia finally agrees to. as they invade and liberate the Levant, Syria, and they try liberating Iraq and Iran. And their front surprising the Soviets. Meaning the Soviets don't have a land bridge to here, which means start of the campaign here by the south, by Ethiopia and the British Empire. Here, the French, what's left of French Africa, which is really just a bunch of colonies that are deciding whether or not to declare independence, but with them really having more power than they used to. With Finland making a counteroffensive in the north. This is where a Norway campaign is decided to be done by Britain and the USA, and its many North American allies, including Brazil, Canada, Newfoundland, Mexico, and what's left is the Netherlands up there. But yeah, with the fall of Oslo, this is where it starts looking bleak. As the Soviets are kicked out of here, it's seen as bad news, really. With the Finns pushing up to here, meaning they now have supplies coming for them, which is very great for them, honestly. With the American campaign into South Korea beginning. With the Soviets seeing this as something that they should keep an eye on, they march right into South Korea becoming more powerful. And so then they start, as the Soviets are marching into Manchukuo, they even march into Sakhalin, which is a big deal. With them marching over to about here, that's a big chunk of Manchukuo falling. With Japan's ability to not surrender while nukes are not being developed for some reason. They haven't been yet. They have been unsuccessful in their creation. As this eventually becomes the front line here, with a race into Japan, as a two-front war has begun. And for Japan, and both nations are wanting to fail Japan to do better than the other. But this was a trick, as Finland is getting more supplies from the Allies. Their success is becoming more likely. With the American troops and British troops in Africa deciding an advance in Spain is necessary. But yeah, Iberia doesn't really resist well. As Britain and the Americans have invaded from the south, Iberia has collapsed because they're a puppet, so they didn't really care. But their advance is starting to slow, especially in Italy, to catch the Comintern off balance. Because really only Germany, Xinjiang, East Turkestan, Mongolia, and Communist China on it. With island hopping becoming a necessity, basically. And a landing by Britain being made in Brittany, and one by America in the south. That's where the weakness was. As Europe is starting to lose huge swaths of land to France. As France has been divided, and the borders are going to be changed, this really is just a blue team occupation, not really France. Because France hasn't been established. With an idea to invade Denmark, which is done by Britain and America. With the Americans, Canadians, and everybody marching into Benelux. And the advance to the Rhine was a success. And the governments controlled by Russia are starting to fall. And the fall of these nations were a big deal, as this has allowed a push right up to the Caspian Sea. Well, that's being a big deal, especially for the Soviet Union, who has just created these monster nations, including, with Saudi Arabia and the US starting a campaign here. With it being based off here. With the weakness of the German nation within here being exposed. With the free Italy being freed, a march into the rest of Germany from the south has started. Through mountains they went. With most of Germany falling, Germany refuses to surrender, even after Berlin falls, as they become increasingly controlled by the Soviet Union. Well, the world seeing how weak Germany actually was when they started to fall. But this is where the campaign into Yugoslavia begins. And they began their campaign into the Balkans. Let's go look at Asia. Let's focus on there. Well, the fall of communist China is inevitable at this point. And yeah. Kicking the Soviets out of Manchukuo and Japan has happened. And with a successful campaign, meaning they push up to there. With the puppets being weak, so easy to take on. Not the countries that they have that are fighting, because they're more pro. With Germany's communist revolution being a mistake by the communist leaders realizing joining the Soviet team was a bad idea, being a Soviet ally. But at this point, it's way too late. With them basically just freezing in Ukraine and making a bulge up to Moscow, which soon becomes a spearhead. The encirclement of Moscow and the taking of the city. And the end of the war on the horizon, especially in Eastern Russia. No, Western Russia. But in Eastern Russia, yeah, the campaign doesn't look so nice for them. With Everett landing in to try and reestablish a democracy. And so, yeah. With the Far East having fallen. With the push towards Leningrad beginning. And it seeming like the mighty Soviet Union, or so they thought, is a paper tiger and going to fall over. As they pretended to be unstoppable, their stop and demise has begun. With them demising to the Western Russia, and Afghanistan at this point just decides it wants to surrender. Along with East Turkestan surrenders because they can't fight, put up. And seeing that there's no point, Mongolia surrenders, which leads to the fall of that. The troops flooding into these countries that just surrendered. And everybody on the Soviet Union at this point. Well, they're looking like Eastern Russia falled. And then so did Central Russia. It became irrelevant, and they have to make a treaty. The treaty will be 3 parts. Europe, Asia, and North America. Asia includes the Middle East and Europe, but South America is where it begins. And Paraguay and Panama have gained land in the treaty that affected North America. Now it's the Berlin Treaty, which affects West Russia and parts of the Middle East and all of Europe. And now for the treaty. Has changed significantly with the recent changes to its borders. And this is mostly due to the fact that, well, most of the countries were on the Soviets team or occupied by the Soviets. They were released, and the Middle East was just changed up. Everyone freed from being a puppet state, and a bit of borders changed, like the Caucasus Republic and stuff. But let's look into the Treaty of Asia. What was Asia's punishment for this war? A big punishment is going to be awarded to Japan and the Soviet Union. The biggest ones to East Turkestan, and yeah. That is what their punishment's going to be for East Turkestan and Mongolia. So yeah. Let's go change the borders. Newfoundland deciding they're ready for change as they join the Democratic League. And Germany and Poland, at the same time, along with Ukraine, Austria, Hungary, and Finland, all vote to join the Democratic League. And that's now. Which Yugoslavia changing, also joining it. It's slowly expanding. And with South Africa declaring its independence, but does not exactly join the Democratic League. With India joining the Democratic League after declaring its independence. But yeah. Yep, India is united in this timeline. They didn't get partitioned. They knew better than partitioning. Like, the French Empire is still intact for the most part. Let's look at it. This is the French Empire. And yeah, there is a bit of, like, disunity and stuff going on. Well, right now, most of these nations still stay. It was just South Africa who left the Union. A few other nations decide to, including... Not Ethiopia at this point does, but they just do. Because they can. With an ally versus Democratic League basically starting to come together and decide, yeah, maybe we should merge together. And by the end of the video, I guess, it is now that time, both leagues are officially united into one. The Democratic League has taken over. And any tyranny would have to go through this. Thank you for watching today's video. We have about 40 or 30 subscribers left to go till we get our goal. So please like and subscribe, as that'd be great for the channel. That's all for today's video. Wild Mapper out, but not until you subscribe. Bye, guys. I hope you enjoyed the end of World War II.